College football nerds here to do our top 10 for week 6, and these have been pretty popular and generated a lot of discussion. A lot of people telling us how much they hate us and how crazy we are, so we thought we'd keep doing them because we're gluttons for punishment. Remember, if you're not already liking and subscribing our videos, they help out a lot. Really, that's the best way you can help the channel, other than commenting below. So we're going to start this by saying, please give us your top 10. You can tell us in the comments how we're crazy, this is what you're wrong, blah, blah, blah. But also give us your top 10. That's why we started these, to sort of give an opportunity for y'all to get involved as well. So Josh, big story, big headliner this week is that Clemson, with their struggles versus North Carolina, dropped to number 2 in the AP poll. And I tweeted out that I think that's pretty lazy on the AP voters' part. 1, Clemson at 2 is too high. It's still living on the legacy of last year, which I think they've earned something to stay in the top 5, top 6 kind of area. They have not earned a number 2 spot, even though there's other teams that haven't played anybody, blah, blah, blah. What I hate is that they just followed it up with swapping Alabama and Clemson because, hey, what's the other team we want to have live on their legacy? Let's put Alabama there. I think Alabama's still an elite team, but for my number 1, I have Ohio State. And I'm going to discuss them alongside Alabama, who I have at number 2. Last week I had Alabama number 1. This week I have them number 2. And this just goes to show y'all this is how you should do a top 25. It should be completely malleable based on data. So here we are. Josh, I have Ohio State number 1. I think they're the most complete team in the country. I think you agree. Alabama, to me, either Alabama or Oklahoma probably have the best offense in the country. Probably Oklahoma because they have the better run game. Alabama's offensive line has looked better. That's one of the places where we were a little concerned, but their defense, and it's not their pass defense. It's their run defense has really concerned me if I'm an Alabama fan expecting a national championship this season. Ohio State handling business, giving up 7, giving up 0. Sorry, I missed that one for y'all last week. So we can go into this, and I've kind of talked a lot, so I'm not going to talk much more about explaining why I've got them 1 and 2. I'll let you talk about where you've got them. Give me your 1 and 2, and we'll go from there.
So, yeah, I mean, I've got the same set you do. I have Ohio State number 1. I have Alabama number 2. And the reason for it, honestly, it's pretty simple. With Ohio State right now, they're playing complete football on both sides of the ball. Going into the Nebraska game, we thought Nebraska was going to be able to put up some points. Now, I didn't think Nebraska was going to be dominant by any means, but I thought Nebraska would at least be competitive in that game. That did not happen. So knowing where Ohio State is in terms of an offense that hasn't shown any serious weakness, a run game that's a lot better than Alabama's, a passing game that's still very effective. I don't think the passing game is quite what Alabama's is, and that's not to say the numbers aren't great, but it's a little more horizontal than vertical right now. It's still extremely good, but defensively, they have a better ability to rush the passer. They have much better depth. They're a much better run defense. And sort of due to the request and out of curiosity, because we did the Ohio State model, we ran these percentages aloud, and we talked about Ohio State's right like 68, 69% on both. Alabama's 75% on pass defense. Their pass defense, for all the talk of glitches, maybe it's a tick worse than Ohio State's. It's not all that much different. I think they're not. Basically, if you switched Young from Ohio State to Alabama, you'd pretty much end up with this flip-flopping who is or is not the better pass defense. The problem is Alabama's run defense has been good, but not much more than that. Ohio State's is elite. Offensively, we can get into who is not or is better, but I think the fact that Ohio State, if they played Alabama today, would probably be able to run the ball pretty darn well, and Alabama would not be able to run it at all, would end up deciding that game. So that's how I end up having right now Alabama behind Ohio State, and that's despite the fact we talk about scaling a lot. I think Alabama is going to be able to pass the ball a lot better on Ohio State in that theoretical matchup than maybe Ohio State could on Alabama. But that would be everything else neutral. The difference in the run games and the run game matchups between the two teams, and this is going to happen, it's not just Alabama versus Ohio State, but also how they play in a semifinal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That gives the edge right now to Ohio State over Alabama to me.
And these things can change from week to week. We've talked about consistently, we've talked about how Alabama and Ohio State haven't played anybody yet. They still haven't. And I don't care what you say. Nebraska sucks. Ole Miss sucks. South Carolina is okay. They're not good. They're okay. So you should blow these teams out, and that's why they're ranked where they are. You know, people are going to complain and say, oh, well, Alabama hasn't played anybody. Ohio State hasn't played anybody. Why are you having their 1 and 2 when Georgia, my number 3, has beaten Notre Dame? Well, I don't think it's fair to just rank somebody because of resume. What you're saying, if you think Georgia should be ahead of Alabama or Ohio State because they beat Notre Dame, what you're saying is you don't think Ohio State or Alabama would beat Notre Dame. And I don't agree. They just haven't had the chance to play that team yet. Because if we're going to make that argument, then we need to go ahead and put Auburn number 1. And nobody thinks Auburn is the best team in the country. No slight to Auburn. They are in our top 10. Nobody thinks Auburn is the best team in the country. Far and away best team in the country. So when you say, oh, Ohio State hasn't played anybody, so you can't put them number 1, well, then that means you're saying because someone had the benefit of playing somebody else, they should automatically be number 1 without considering whether or not Ohio State would beat Oregon, would beat Notre Dame, would beat Texas. And I think they would, so they're number 1. I've got Georgia number 3 and Oklahoma number 4. This is the other area where right now, if I had the biggest question mark of where I might have some change week to week, it is this spot. I love the Georgia win over Notre Dame. I think it was a much better win than people are giving them credit for because I think Notre Dame is better than people are giving credit for. By the way, 15-point win over Virginia is not that bad because Virginia is actually pretty good. But Oklahoma right now is that offense is crazy. It's really good, and it's not just Jalen Hurts is getting all the love, but Oklahoma has wide receivers. They have running backs. That offensive line has really not stepped back, even though they've lost a lot of players. And oh, by the way, the defense is handling their business like they haven't before. Last year, Oklahoma plays, and I know Bowman got hurt, but Oklahoma plays Texas Tech, and it's like a 55-48 type game. This year, they score 16. So that's the Oklahoma we haven't seen lately. That's what I like about them. I still have some question marks because Oklahoma ain't played nobody, Paul. Georgia has a proven recruiting base, has a proven quarterback, great running game. Right now, it's hard for me to push Georgia much further down than third. Give me your number 3 and number 4. I'm talking too much tonight.
My number 3 is Oklahoma. My number 4 is Georgia. And it's all super volatile, right? If you look at the last couple of weeks, my top 10 looks almost completely different. Honestly, I don't think there's a ton of separation in these top 6 teams, or at least let me put it this way. There's no proven separation. It's kind of going week to week on how I feel, and it doesn't necessarily make sense. But the thing that's deciding it right now for me, it's all about scaling. And I'm trying to project these teams out in like a playoff scenario because the top 6, 7 teams in the country, in my view, are going to beat everybody else pretty consistently in college football right now. I'm not sure that it's terribly close. And I think Oklahoma's offense is going to be elite basically regardless of who they play. I think Georgia's defense is much better than Oklahoma's. Oklahoma's is still good. Georgia's is a very good, probably very underratedly good defense. I mean, they've kind of done everything you've asked of them. They're super aggressive. They're super fast, super physical. But right now, Oklahoma's offense looks unstoppable. That's why I have them slightly ahead of Georgia. The reason I don't have Oklahoma ahead of Alabama or Ohio State is, one, I don't think their defense is improved and good. It's still not on the level of those other, basically anybody else in the top, this top set for me. And two, I still am not completely trusting in that offense and its ability to scale. Again, in large part because we have past data with Jalen Hurts, where Jalen Hurts in multiple years at Alabama did set a lot of offensive records, did score 40, 50 points a game, running what was not as good of an offense, didn't have quite as many playmakers around it, but that offense did not translate at all against elite defenses. That gives me enough pause, given how even everybody is, to just drop Oklahoma a little bit back, but still ahead of Georgia.
We're doing these in pairs so far, so I'll keep doing it in pairs. Number 5, I got LSU, then I got Clemson at number 6. And honestly, this is another one of those resume things, and it's probably not fair to Auburn because I've got Auburn behind Clemson. I've got LSU ahead of Clemson because I don't think Clemson beats them on a neutral field right now. And look, it's so hard for me because I actually want to rate Clemson higher. I've been ringing the bell for 3 years now that it doesn't matter who Clemson plays, they can still be elite. The problem is now they're playing crappy teams and struggling with them. I'm not going to kill Clemson because North Carolina sucks. I'm not going to kill Clemson because Texas A&M sucks. That is not their fault. But 21-20 versus North Carolina is their fault. And it's not to say that you can't have a down game or whatever, but if you think 21-20 should have you in the top 3, let's say, then that means you don't think Georgia does any better. You don't think maybe Alabama does any better. And I'm sorry, but they just do. For me, LSU's getting killed on the defensive side of the ball. They've had a lot of injuries. I think they will get healthy over the season. We're not talking about a lot of season-ending injuries. That offense is for real, y'all. Burrow is for real, y'all. The one concern I have for LSU, though, besides some of these defensive things, is they still aren't a good running team. And that is a place that I might have, if I'm seeing down the road where I drop them a little bit, it's because of that running game, and maybe there are some defensive woes that don't get better. Go ahead and give me your next 2 teams.
I have Clemson 5 and LSU 6, so just the reverse of yours. We so far we've been having the same pairs, but often in different orders. Same things you've said. So here's the positive and the negative for Clemson in a nutshell. The positive for Clemson is the defense is still very good, and I'm not sure quite how elite it is compared to last year. It's still very, very good. I'm not sure that it's the number 2 overall kind of unit that it was last year. Still probably top 10. In the game against North Carolina, they held them to 5.4 yards per play. That was lower than North Carolina's had in recent games. They weren't giving up a ton of yards. The concern is 5.4 yards per play was still more than South Carolina gave up, and it was about 0.2 yards per play off their season average for North Carolina. The bad thing, Clemson's 4.6 yards per play was the lowest yard per play total anyone has had against North Carolina all year. In 5 games, South Carolina, Miami, Wake Forest, and App State all averaged more than 4.6 yards per play against North Carolina. We have been concerned about that offense and its inconsistency all season. It's still there, and at this point, 5 games in, I'm getting really concerned. I mean, A&M's defense is not a very good pass defense. Arkansas just showed that. We were suspicious of it. Clemson doesn't seem to be able to turn it around. But given the defensive consistency, I have them ahead of LSU. And there's 2 parts to that. One, LSU's defense is giving up a fair number of yards. I mean, Texas, 6 yards per play. Is Texas really good offense? We're not sure. Vanderbilt, though, 5.1 yards per play was not good. And I know that game, a lot of it was in garbage time. We've talked about depth. We talked about that a lot in the Ohio State preview. That's not a great number. The big difficulty for LSU right now, LSU has only played 3 FBS games. One of whom was Georgia Southern. The other one was Vanderbilt. You've got Clemson with 5 FBS games, LSU with only 3 due to an FCS and a bye. We know almost half as much about LSU as a lot of the other teams on this list. In fact, Oklahoma, Georgia, and LSU all have only played 3 FBS teams. So one of the big challenges is we say, yeah, we're in week 6. We should be able to know more. Well, we've got week 6, and we got 3 FBS teams played. It's like they're taking every other week off in terms of the data. So it's just really hard to peg LSU. They could rise on my list quite a bit. I need to see them actually play a team with an offensive pulse and play decently well on defense for me to rate them any higher, because right now with the very limited data I have, I don't think the defense is necessarily elite.
Yeah, somebody on Twitter earlier today said, I'm rolling my eyes because Alabama LSU is going to be 48-42 and people are going to talk about how great of a game it is. And it's a shot at the commentary that Big 12 defenses don't play good defense, and Big 12 fans are saying, no, it's because our offenses are elite. And I'm sorry, but that's not a fair comparison. People don't kill Big 12 teams because they have epic showdowns. Nobody's saying 2015 Alabama or Clemson had crappy defenses. That game was just epic. It was high scoring. It was fun to watch. When you beat Texas Tech 55-51, that's when we're saying your defense sucks. When every decent offense you play, it's a freaking barn burner, that's when we say your defense sucks. Not in a big game. We're not killing you if Texas, Oklahoma is 43-41. We're killing you if you give up 40 to Kansas. Sorry. I had to get in there.
Let me throw in one thing here before you get roasted. People are going to talk about LSU's rush offense, but I do want to reiterate the point you made. LSU's 85th in the country right now in yard per carry at 3.96 yards per carry.
Against some bad defenses.
Right. They're not a good run offense. And they had this problem last year. We talked about it a lot. They were not a great rush defense. They were not a great rush offense by the yard per play statistics. They're not there again this year. That is a concern that's kind of holding LSU back from the pack right now.
But Joe Burrow this year and those wide receivers, some dudes. Okay, so if we've set up to this point, either Clemson's getting a little benefit of the doubt because they've recruited well, they've been in the national championship game of late, they're a playoff staple. All these other teams, they ain't play nobody, Paul, but they're beating the crap out of them, showing that, let's be honest, the eye test. The reverse of that is let's rank somebody on a resume. And that's where Auburn is. They come in for me at number 7 because they have beaten enough teams for me to think that they're good enough to be where they are at this point. We did a preview this week of Auburn, Florida, and we kind of ended with Auburn can go in multiple directions for the rest of their season. And we don't know. There's still so many question marks. There's question marks good, question marks bad. Right now, though, resume is hard to argue with. And I actually think Oregon's better than they're getting credit for. And we saw some things offensively. Even though Mississippi State sucks, we saw some things offensively that give us a little of encouragement. So Wisconsin, Texas, Notre Dame are rounding out, and we'll talk about that in a second. My top 10, they're floating out there. I don't think any of them have the resume Auburn has, and I'm not sure at this point they'd beat them on a neutral field. Give me your number 7.
My number 7 is Wisconsin. I do think Wisconsin, even with the scare to Northwestern, which was a game where Northwestern didn't really move the ball very much, they're just a very, very good team on both sides of the ball. They're sound. They're good on the lines of scrimmage. The defense is good. I think Jonathan Taylor really deserves. You get sometimes these dark horse running backs that were behind a great offensive line. Jonathan Taylor is really that good. And I think overall Wisconsin is one of the more complete teams. Like, we're going down this list and we're pointing out, LSU's rush offense numbers aren't great. The defense has some, glitches to it. Clemson's offense is not picked up. And then when you look at the guys above them, most of them haven't played all that many great games yet. Wisconsin has probably the most sound team outside of Ohio State where I can't point to anything and say that's bad. I don't think Cone is an elite quarterback. I think there might be a little bit of a resume to beat Wisconsin, but I think they're more complete and proven to this point. And that leads into my number 8, which is Auburn. And I don't know if Auburn should be 8 or if it should be higher. 8 is almost like the average of where I think they could be. I think they're probably a ranked team, but I'm not sure if Auburn's going to end up being 8-4 or 11-1. I just don't know. And people are going to rake us in the comments. I mean, Auburn fans are going to talk about all the wins and everything. The problem is Auburn the 4.6 yards per play against Tulane or 8.4 yards per play against Mississippi State? Because those two things can't really be squared with each other. The team, and you say, well, that was last week. Last week we've improved versus week 2. Okay, 2 weeks ago, A&M, it was 4.75 yards per play, and Arkansas didn't have any trouble generating our offense on A&M. Is your offense similar to Arkansas's in quality because they scored 1 point different? I don't know. I mean, none of it really makes sense. Auburn is the most. It's one thing to say all these teams have question marks. The problem with Auburn is there's the most inconsistent set of data to where they may actually be a top 5 team at the end of the year, and I could just as easily see them being 8-4 and being like 20th. I don't know. And then, rounding out my set, I'll go ahead and jump into Texas and Notre Dame. Texas, we haven't really had the chance to see what they look like because, again, we've got the problem with the double bye year. Teams have not played a lot of games. I had to just check to make sure I wasn't crazy that I didn't miss them last week. Of course, I didn't. That Oklahoma State game is a close game. I think Oklahoma State with Spencer is a really good quarterback. They're going to be a good team. I don't really have any major issue. Again, when you're having close games against really good teams, that's acceptable in my eyes. I think Texas is a good team. Maybe not on the level of the ones above them. Same thing with Notre Dame. You've already lost to Georgia. You showed that you could fight and compete with them. But once, to me, Wisconsin and Auburn are on the cusp of it. Once you get to like 9 and 10, I don't see those 9 and 10 teams being 50-50 competitive with the top 6 to top 8. There's definitely a line where the top 6 to top 8 are on a different tier. They're very rarely going to lose to the teams below them. Clemson that's why we're dinging Clemson so much for the scare. And everything below them, like Texas and Notre Dame, you could be a good deal worse and still be better than the rest of the pack because there's a serious gap when you get outside this top 10.
I think it's possible. I still can't say this because of how consistently good Clemson has been. I think it's possible that there's a massive drop-off after the 5th. I think there's a possibility that Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, LSU, and Oklahoma, and then big drop-off. But we'll see. After Auburn, I have Texas. I have Texas actually ahead of Wisconsin. People are kind of downplaying the Texas win over Oklahoma State, and I think it's bigger than people realize. Oklahoma State just handled Kansas State, no problem. And like you said, that's a good offense. So I was really encouraged by a game that really could have gotten out of hand and been a pretty big win for Texas. So I'm happy with them right after Auburn. And then I have Wisconsin after that because you sort of downplayed how bad Cohn was in the Northwestern game and how bad he was last year. So last year, Cohn started 4 of his 5 appearances, so full games against real teams. And he averaged like 5.5 yards per attempt, which is really bad. Really, really, really bad. Giving him the benefit of the doubt, looks good so far this year. Looked good against Michigan, sort of game managery. Against Northwestern, 4.7 yards per attempt. We're getting into not great rushing yard averages. And against Northwestern, Hunter Johnson went out, I think, first or second quarter of that game. So, yeah, it was an ugly game. They beat him 24-15, but there is some canary in the coal mine getting ready to sing here because Michigan State beat the crap out of Northwestern. So that's why I've dropped them a little bit this week. And then my last is Notre Dame. I was really encouraged. I thought they'd have a letdown after Georgia, and Virginia is not a bad football team. They're the second best team in the ACC, I believe, by a pretty significant margin. And 35-20 is a good score. That's a respectable number. I didn't think Notre Dame would cover. I thought they would be beaten up, have a hangover. They weren't. If anything, I feel like Notre Dame is undervalued right now, and Wisconsin is possibly considerably overvalued. I know you have Wisconsin higher than me, but tell me if I'm maybe onto something.
I think there's a real argument to it. I mean, there's a real chance we're making way too much of the Michigan win with a game where Michigan's offense fell on its face and then the defense maybe got demoralized and Wisconsin ran all over them. When you look at Wisconsin's schedule and the teams they've played, it's kind of a who's who list of teams that have disappointed, right? And we talk about a lot. We don't ding you for beating up on bad teams, but South Florida has grossly underperformed expectations. Michigan has grossly underperformed expectations. Northwestern was a close win where you had 4 yards per play. Central Michigan's just a bad team. Wisconsin is somewhat built on puffery. Now, I still think on the lines of scrimmage, they're really good. That's why I have them where they are. For example, I feel like if they played Auburn today, Auburn wouldn't be able to run the ball very well in Wisconsin. And I feel like maybe Wisconsin can win the game. I'm just going in my head basically like who would I pick Wisconsin versus Auburn, and that's why I have them where I have them. if Auburn beats Florida, in my mind, they probably jump Wisconsin, and there's no looking back unless Wisconsin proves himself at the end of the year. I do think you're onto something there, and I'll make a final point here since we've kind of wrapped up everything, and I agree with you on Notre Dame too. But do you agree with me in thinking? I think this is the year that Alabama and Clemson don't end up playing each other, even though people are going to expect it, unless they just somehow sleepwalk, like Clemson sleepwalks into the ACC championship game. I just think for any of a variety of reasons, it's very unlikely in my mind that Alabama and Clemson end up playing each other.
Yeah, and that's a different point than saying Alabama or Clemson play for the national championship. Right now, I have concerns about Alabama playing or winning a national championship, but I have far bigger concerns for Clemson. And a lot of people are going to say we're Clemson haters. We're not. We have been defending Clemson and their schedule for years, saying they're elite in spite of it. And right now, though, it's undeniable. This has been our number one marker for predicting teams would not make a playoff. We've been showing it with Ohio State. We've showed it with other teams in the past. If you struggle against bad teams consistently, like even their game against Syracuse is a big old red flag for me. When you consistently struggle against bad teams, you're not an elite team. So if they back into the playoffs because they have a weak schedule, I think it's going to be the reverse of them versus the first time they played Oklahoma or the first time they played Ohio State in the playoffs, which I think, we've been clamoring for this like anybody but Alabama or Clemson thing. So I think to your point, which is a really good one, we're going to have more diversity in the playoffs. Either Alabama or Clemson is going to get knocked off before they get there, or they're going to face other teams in the playoffs, and most likely both of them are not going to make the finals, which I do think in a way is good for college football. I think Ohio State coming back so far this year is good for football. And, LSU, Georgia, Alabama, Auburn, it's going to be a bloodbath in the SEC at the top this year. So, look, I think that we've talked about having two teams from the SEC make it again this year. I don't know if I see that. That's another interesting point is if let's say Auburn loses one game this year and it's to Alabama and Alabama wins the SEC championship, is it fair that Auburn gets left out having one of the toughest schedules ever? And this is not rhetorical. I'm throwing it back to you. Is it fair that Auburn with one loss wouldn't get into the playoffs, but a Clemson team who plays nobody and has multiple struggle wins does get in because we say clean record P5, you're automatically in?
I would argue it's not. I've always kind of argued that. I think there would have to be a major outcry, especially given Auburn going out and scheduling Oregon. They win that game. Maybe let's say Oregon wins the Pac-12, right? You beat the Pac-12 champion. You lose to, be it Georgia or Alabama or LSU, and then whoever that team happens to be, well, I guess it really has to be LSU or Alabama in this scenario. You lose the division, you go 11-1. You're the 2017 Alabama example. 2017 Alabama only got in. People talk about this all the time, and they never talk about the context. Only because Ohio State lost twice, and one of them was to a bad Purdue team in a massive,
Iowa. It was Iowa.
I got to get all my years straight, right? That was Iowa. Ohio State stopped doing this, but it was Iowa in the massive blowout. Auburn's not going to get in 11-1, given the landscape. If Clemson goes undefeated, if Ohio State goes undefeated, and Oklahoma goes undefeated, and they're not going to get on over the SEC champion, which is what's likely to happen this year. So Auburn ends up staying at home. You get Clemson. I think there's a genuine argument that Auburn's better than Clemson. Auburn will be a hell of a lot more proven than Clemson at 11-1. I mean, they've played a lot more ranked games. They've been playing a lot better teams. They'll have much better wins if they've beaten 2 of 3 of LSU, LSU, Alabama, and Georgia. Well, at the moment, we've got no reason to think Clemson could do that. But Clemson's going to be the ACC champion. They're going to get in, and it's going to be funny if they get in and it's like 2004 where we watched Oklahoma just get absolutely waxed by USC, and you sit there going, well, okay, yeah, I'm sure they really deserve to be in over Auburn.
Yeah, and again, that's a hypothetical. Clemson fans, we're not killing you. We like, it's so funny. We talk about these scenarios in week 5, 6, 7. It always shakes out where somebody loses that we don't expect, and then it's all academic after that. All right, y'all, that is our top 10 for this week, and we would love, as we reminded you in the beginning, or like to remind you now, as we said in the beginning, please give us your top 10 in the comments. Let us know, and we'll try to chime in and mix it up with you, because this is sort of a medium. We don't have a forum. We don't have another place for us to talk to you. So here in the comments, we want to discuss with you what your top 10 looks like. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week, and God bless.